Testing strategy for developers. So my name is Yonatan. Recently I joined the Fed Guild as the infra team lead. And before that I was at Editor Elements, as you can see. About me, my hobbies are swimming, playing basketball, and testing. I love testing. I know some of you find it weird. I know that some of you are probably scared of testing. But you know what even scarier than testing? Bug in production. When you're the on-call at the weekend. No, I'm just kidding. But why we avoid testing? We avoid testing because of tight deadlines, right? It's time-consuming to write tests. We need to maintain them. End-to-end tests tend to be very flaky. And maybe knowledge gaps. Maybe you didn't write tests until now. Maybe you don't have a clear testing guidelines in your company. So there's various reasons. So don't be scared anymore. What we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what is a testing strategy and how it will reduce the pain of testing, how to create a testing strategy document, and we'll see an example at Editor Elements how we implemented the testing strategy, like in all other slides. So, testing strategy, what is it? A testing strategy is a high-level document which outlines the principles of testing for your project. It will tell you what, how, and when to test. It will align the testing approach with your project goals. And that's it. So why should developers take ownership of their testing strategy? So once upon a time, our teams consisted from QA engineers and full-stack engineers. So the QA engineers were responsible for creating the testing strategy, the test plans, making sure the projects are resilient and you don't have bug in productions. And the full-stack developers were responsible for delivering the features. Now, today, we see a shift where these two entities, the QA and the full-stack engineers, are separated. So now we have only developers in the groups. So who is responsible for the testing strategy? I can tell you that projects without testing strategy, probably you all know this screen when you see test that fails or pass and you don't see a clear reason why it happens. You also have insufficient test coverage, which leads to production bugs. If you don't have testing guidelines, we already talked about it, we will probably have frustrated developers, inconsistent tests, and redundant tests. Yeah? Maybe we test the same thing all over again in our project. And maybe lack of infrastructure, okay? So if you don't have the right infrastructure for testing your project, you probably have limited testing capabilities, and it can be higher test costs because writing the test for the developers will be a harder job and maybe it's not the most optimized way for testing your project. Now, before we jumping into understanding how to create a testing strategy, I just want to give you a brief explanation to who of you that don't know what is Editor Elements and why we got to a point where we need to create a new testing strategy. So, Editor Elements are the components that build your Wix websites. So we can see here the button component, which is actually a just a React component. But we also have the GFPPs, which are the buttons that we see that open the custom panels. We of course have the panels that customize our components. We have the Velo SDK, which enables us writing an API for the developers that use Wix, like APIs to working with our components. And behind the scenes, we have schemas, mappers, metadata, and so on. Like many parts that they all integrate together in the Wix website and give you the full Wix experience. Now, our testing strategy was unit testing each editor element part separately and writing end-to-end tests, which test the entire component flow in the Wix website. Now, this approach was problematic, and we can see it based on these statistics. So our master success rate was only 33%, and the PR CI duration was 50 minutes. So think about it. You want to ship one line of code, you probably need to rerun it 3 times just so the CI passes, and every time you wait 50 minutes. And only after that, you have code review that wants some change, right? And then you need to start this process all over again. So to ship 1 line of code, it can take you a few days. Now, we started implementing a new testing strategy, and we already see great results, but it's still work in progress. So now our master success rate is 60% and only 30 minutes CI duration. So it's already we know that we are on the right track, but we're still not where we want to be. So we set an exit criteria based on the data we already gathered, and we know that soon we will get to a point where we have 80% success in master, and CI duration will be decreased to 60 minutes. Now, it doesn't mean it's perfect, but it means that we can stop proactively working on the testing strategy, and we need just to maintain it and keep working in this direction. All right, so now we understand like how testing strategy can impact your project. Let's understand how to write one. So what is a testing strategy? Testing strategy is basically a document which consists of 5 steps. We will go into each step, and in each step we'll explain what is the reason of this step and how we did it in editor elements as the live example. So, first step is what is your current testing state, right? And it's relevant for all stakeholders. So something important about testing strategy, it affects everyone, not only the developers or your group leads, it affects also the managers, the product managers, everyone, because it's affecting your entire project, right? How fast you deliver features and how resilient your projects are. So we will start by understanding what is your current state and what are the weaknesses and gaps of this state, because we want to create a new one. So in editor elements, we already talked about it. We have end-to-end tests for testing the functionality of the components in live sites, and we have visual regression tests to test the visual permutations of our component. We also have unit tests for each editor element part. Now the problem with this approach is that we have too many end-to-end tests, and of course the CI is very long and flaky. Another problem is that we found that we have many test functionality duplications all over our project. So here we can see an example of this duplication. So we have the shared value SDK functionality. What is the shared value focus SDK functionality? It's just attaching to a component the focus and non-focus methods in Velo. Okay? And we have many components like that. Like all the form components should have focus and non-focus, all interactable components. So to test this functionality, we need to have 2 unit tests for React, 2 unit tests for the Velo SDK, and 2 end-to-end tests that test the focus and non-focus in a live site, and multiply it by 35 components which implement this shared functionality. So overall, you have 130 unit tests and 70 end-to-end tests that basically they all do the same thing, just test the focus and non-focus functions. Okay, so step 2, again, relevant for all stakeholders, is to define the goals and objectives of your new testing strategy, right? Because you want to explain everyone what are your goals and what you want to achieve. Now, your goals should be based on business, on the business goals, the developer's expectations, and the project requirements. So in editor elements, we want to find an alternative for over-testing with E2E tests. We want to improve our testing coverage, reduce the amount of flaky end-to-end tests, and reduce test applications, right? We already talked about it. And eventually, after it's all done, we want to create a clear testing guidelines and best practices so all developers can understand how they test the project and they don't have like any unknowns or like open questions. Okay, now we are going into the technical part. So step 3 is what is our testing scope and layers of our project. So we will split our project into all unit, integration, and end-to-end layers, like all layers that we know. Some project might have other layers like component and stuff like that, but let's keep it like abstract as possible. And in each layer, we will understand what we want to test and what is out of scope. Now, out of scope, it might be because of third-party integrations. Maybe we will have test duplications if we test the same functionality in each layer, right? So we will take a generic front-end application example. Our front-end application consists of UI, okay, where we have components, layouts, pages, stuff like that. We have global state, probably with Redux or something like that. And we have services. Services just call our backend API. So we will do unit tests for each part, okay? So we'll unit test the components, unit test our utilities, but we will not unit test our global state because it's mainly just third-party integration. We don't have a lot of business logic there. Now we will have integration test in a mock testing environment with a mock server, which tests all our component front-end parts together. And here we can see that we already covered the global state as well. And the end-to-end layer is the most intuitive one. It's just our application in production. In editor elements, the same example will go in that we unit test each editor element part separately. For integration test, we will test all editor element parts except panels in a mock viewer environment, so mock live site environment that we will create. And we will have a regular end-to-end testing in live sites. Now you can see here that we skip testing panels, because testing panels, it means we should test in the editor, and there is a lot of editor APIs that we or should mock, or they are not consistent for our testing, and we don't want to go into, we don't have the appropriate infrastructure yet for testing this, the panels like without introducing more flakiness. But we will get there as well. So step 4, now when we understand what we want to test and what is our testing layers, is to understand what is our testing approach. So we will first select a known testing model that's most suitable for our project. We will select in each layer which test types we want to perform based on our business requirements. And we will make sure we have good test separation of concerns. So what is a good test separation of concerns? You can just ask yourself if my test is easy to debug, and can it run in parallel, okay? So if it is easy to debug, probably you test only one feature. If it fails, you immediately know like what is the reason it fails. And if it runs in parallel, it means that one fact does not affect another test, okay? And that means you have a clear separation of testing and they all can work together in the best and the most optimized way. Now selecting a testing model. We all know the testing pyramid, right? It prioritizes unit tests. It focuses on speed and isolation because it first runs the most fast and not expensive test, only the unit test, and only if they pass, we will run the integration test. And at the end, if they all pass, we will run the most expensive and long end-to-end tests. That way we save cost, money, have quick feedback loop. And this approach emphasizes on creating very resilient units, right? Because you will test all the possible permutations of your units, both happy flow, rainy day, edge cases, everything. Now, a different approach is the testing trophy. It's a more modern approach, which prioritizes integration testing. And the idea here is to focus on user-centric testing. So think about it. Like if you have many integration tests in your system, integration tests are actually your real user flows. So if all your user flows pass, probably the users can work with your system and everything works as expected. But if you have many unit tests, nothing tells you like the full story that they all work together and you understand like the entire flows of your application, and you can say, yeah, I'm sure they work. So in editor elements, we really selected the testing trophy as our model because we want our test to be user-focused. We understand that many integration tests can replace some end-to-end tests in our system, and it will serve as a documentation of our component flow. So now we can go to the spec of our test, read the integration test, and we actually understand like all the features for the component that are available both for live site, preview, and editor. Now, in each testing layer, let's start to break down which test types we have in each testing layer. So as we said, for integration, we will test all editor element user flows. For units, we will test the functionality of each editor element part, but we will test only edge cases and error handling to make sure we don't have test duplications. And in our end-to-end layer, we will have functional tests that test the main component functionality. We will have visual tests to test the visual permutations of our component, and we will have system sanity tests which test the core and shared functionality of editor elements. Now this approach with integration system sanity tests, we will go back to the example of the shared functionality. So now we only need to perform 2 integration tests for each component, and we will have 2 system sanity tests on a general test component. So now, for these 35 components with the focus functionality, we will have 70 integration tests, but only 2 end-to-end system sanity tests. Before we had 70 end-to-end tests and 130 unit tests. So it's already a lot better, and we understand that we reduced like a bunch of end-to-end tests. And the last step, step 5, is again technical, but it's pretty straightforward, is to understand what is your environment and infrastructure. So you want to list the environment and the infrastructure for each test layer, unit integration end-to-end. You want to understand if you need special infrastructure for each test type. For example, you want in your system to introduce performance test. Do you need some third-party integrations for that, or for visual tests, or whatever? And eventually, if you need to create your custom one, try to evaluate what is the effort for supporting this new infrastructure. So as I said, in editor elements, we didn't have the integration test before, so we created integration testing framework, because why not? We love frameworks. And the integration testing framework actually combines all the editor element parts together, similar to how it works in the live site. It will inject into each part the data that we want for our test, and eventually we will render it into the environment that we want, like live site, editor, and preview, and it helps us asserting like stuff on our component. But now we don't, it's not an end-to-end test, it's not in a real environment, so it's a lot cheaper and faster, and give us quick feedback loop. For system sanity test, we created a new environment sanity testing, which we perform like the actual shared and core functionality of editor elements, and they all tested on a just general test component. So now we don't want to test it on each component. We have a dedicated test component that supports all our features, and we just can test it there. And that's it. We finished our testing strategy document. But now, yeah, you can clap. It's okay, it's okay. Yes. So now you start the real work, if it wasn't enough, because it's just a piece of paper, right? What you can do with it. Don't answer this. I will answer it for you. So, first we want to share the testing strategy with our group, right? Both the technical and not technical people, because we want to get review and feedback and just to share the knowledge of what we are going to do. We want to have internal workshops and sessions because we want to share the knowledge and keep all the group engaged in our new testing approach. We want to create a backlog of migration tasks and distribute it across your team, because it's not only your focus to change your testing strategy in the project, it's a group effort. Next, we want to define an exit criteria. Okay, so this is important because if you don't decide if you don't define the exit criteria, you don't know what success looks like. So it means you just don't know when to stop working on your testing strategy, and you always want to update it or change it or stuff like that. But if you set an exit criteria and you see that you're on the right track, it means that you don't need to proactively work on the testing strategy. You just need to keep maintaining it and distributing tasks across team. And of course, always monitor the progress and share the results with your team. Now, as I told you, we had exit criteria and editor elements, so we understood that we need to overall migrate 45 editor elements out of 120, which are the most like flaky or with the most tests. And we can estimate based on the data we gathered that we will have, as I told you before, 80% master success rate and CI duration only 60 minutes. Now, a few action items from this talk. Try to identify the project testing pain points. Like, this is your speech to your managers to give you the opportunity to work actually on technical stuff and not only on features that your team is responsible for. Now, you don't need to identify from the first, as you start, like all the problems that you have in the project. You can start with only one, eventually create a testing strategy according to the project needs, but you can only have a testing strategy to solve this one gap or this one pain point, right? And set an exit criteria and implement and monitor, of course. So why I'm telling you that? Because maybe as I talked, it looks like it's all or nothing, like you need to create the entire testing strategy or it doesn't work without it, but it's not true. You can just identify one pain point, have a good solution for it, share it with the group, and they will see the results, like how much you improved your developer experience just by doing that, or the project resilience, and then you will get more and more opportunities to work on your project pain points, and eventually you will get the full testing strategy, like without the crazy effort of doing all just as you start. So that's it. Thank you. Yeah.